The microphone squealed when my father tapped it. It was his 50th birthday dinner, held in the private room of the same hotel where he used to host shareholder updates when the company was small enough to fit around one table. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, a banner someone thought was tasteful. He smiled in that measured way he uses when he is about to sound generous. "Before dessert," he said, "I want to acknowledge my son, Daniel, for stepping into a larger leadership role this quarter. It's time the company had firmer hands on the wheel." A few people clapped. Daniel gave a humble nod that wasn't humble. My father continued. "Lena has done admirable work in operations, of course. She's meticulous, but vision requires risk tolerance. And sometimes the next phase demands a different kind of authority." There it was. Polite laughter followed. Someone near the end of the table murmured something about fresh energy. My aunt reached for her wine. I folded my napkin once and set it beside my plate. Daniel leaned toward the microphone. "We're streamlining decision-making. No more bottlenecks." His eyes flicked toward me just long enough to make the point clear. I nodded once. They didn't realize something had already changed. I've been described my entire life as steady, reliable, practical, the one who keeps things from falling apart. It's a compliment that slowly becomes a container. Have you ever noticed how families reward the person who speaks the loudest and depend on the one who says the least? Have you ever been told you're indispensable, and then treated as replaceable in the same breath? If you understand quiet resilience, you'll probably recognize parts of this story. You can subscribe if that kind of composure feels familiar to you. And if you've ever been underestimated in a room that depended on you, I'm curious what that looked like. Because tonight wasn't like the others. Our family business began in a garage that smelled like printer ink and damp cardboard. My father handled sales. He could persuade anyone of almost anything. Daniel, 2 years younger than me, was the natural performer. Even at 12 he could narrate a story as if it had background music. I handled logistics because someone had to. Inventory systems, vendor contracts, payroll scheduling, regulatory filings, the parts no one photographs. When we incorporated, I was 24 and had just finished a master's degree in supply chain management. My father said titles were flexible in family companies. What mattered was loyalty. He became CEO. Daniel became Director of Strategic Growth. I became COO, though that title existed mostly in email signatures. In meetings, my father spoke first. Daniel spoke second. I spoke when clarification was required. When vendors were late, they called me. When compliance audits happened, I hosted them. When payroll didn't align because sales projections were optimistic, I rebalanced accounts so no one missed a check. Twice in the first 3 years, Daniel announced initiatives that would have cost us 6 figures. Twice, I quietly redirected funds before contracts were finalized. At dinner tables, though, I was detail-oriented. They assumed compliance was permanent. Access is not glamorous, but it is instructive. Because I managed back-end systems, I had administrator privileges across our financial platforms. I oversaw board documentation. I coordinated with our external counsel when filings were due. I knew which shares were voting and which were symbolic. I knew the difference between majority equity and majority control. 5 years ago, when we restructured to attract outside investors, our attorney suggested a dual-class share model to protect founding authority. My father liked the phrase founding authority. He retained Class A voting shares. Daniel received non-voting Class B shares as part of a compensation package. I received a smaller percentage of equity, but a conditional clause attached to the operating agreement that most people skimmed. The clause stated that if the CEO voluntarily transferred operational oversight without board ratification, Class A voting rights would temporarily convert to a shared structure requiring unanimous executive consent for major decisions. It was written to prevent hostile takeovers from external investors. No one considered internal enthusiasm. Over the last year, Daniel's firmer hands translated into unilateral vendor changes and public commitments made before operational review. I documented each deviation the way I document everything. 3 months ago, he signed a preliminary agreement expanding into a market we had not modeled. He did it during a conference while I was finalizing compliance paperwork for our largest client. He assumed authority traveled with confidence. It doesn't. Access teaches you what authority often ignores. 2 weeks before my father's birthday dinner, Daniel forwarded an internal memo announcing his appointment as co-CEO. The board had not voted. The memo cited strategic alignment discussions. I read it twice, then opened the operating agreement. The clause was clear. If operational oversight shifted without formal ratification, voting rights converted until a vote occurred. Daniel had copied senior staff. Investors had replied with congratulatory notes. No one had checked the mechanics. I emailed our attorney. The response was brief. If oversight has been publicly reassigned without board approval, the conversion clause is triggered automatically. Any major decisions now require unanimous executive consent until ratified. Unanimous included me. I requested an emergency board meeting for procedural clarification. My father suggested we not overcomplicate celebratory momentum. I asked counsel to attend. During the meeting, the attorney outlined the clause. Calmly, precisely. My father's expression tightened. Daniel called it a technicality. The attorney called it enforceable. The board postponed ratification pending formal review. From that moment forward, no expansion, contract, or leadership change could proceed without my signature. By the time we gathered for the birthday dinner, the structure had already changed. Back in the private room, my father lifted his glass again. To evolution, he said. To boldness. Daniel added, to clarity in leadership. He looked directly at me when he said clarity. A cousin asked whether this meant new branding. Daniel nodded. We're simplifying authority. One decisive voice. I watched our investors exchange glances. My father gestured toward me. Lena prefers systems to spotlights. And that's valuable. But not every strength scales. There was gentle laughter again. He asked if anyone wanted to add something. The microphone rested on the table between us. I did not stand. I have a quick procedural note, I said, my voice carrying without amplification. The room quieted, not dramatically, just enough. 2 weeks ago, an internal memo referenced a leadership transition. That memo triggered a conversion clause in our operating agreement. Daniel's smile held, but only just. Our voting structure is currently shared pending board ratification, which means any changes to leadership or expansion require unanimous executive approval. I folded my hands lightly on the table. That includes mine. Silence arrived in stages. First from our investors. Then from my aunt. Then from my father. Daniel leaned back. It's temporary, he said. Yes, I agreed. Until ratified. And you're opposing ratification? One investor asked carefully. I'm requesting formal review before public declarations. No accusation. No raised voice. Just sequence. Someone's fork hovered above a slice of cake and did not descend. Confusion is quieter than outrage. An investor opened his phone. Another whispered to his spouse. My father adjusted his cuff links, a gesture he uses when recalibrating. Daniel cleared his throat. This is internal governance, he said. We can address it Monday. We can, I said. But since it was introduced publicly, clarification seemed appropriate. My father forced a smile. Lena is thorough. Always, my aunt murmured, though she was looking at Daniel. The banner above us suddenly felt excessive. Status doesn't collapse in a dramatic heap. It tilts. And when it tilts, everyone feels it even if no one names it. After dessert, my father asked me to step into the hallway. The hotel corridor smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. He lowered his voice. You didn't need to correct that tonight. I didn't need to announce it tonight either, I said. He sighed. Daniel is trying to grow into the role. Growth is fine, I said. Circumventing governance isn't. He studied me as if reassessing a familiar blueprint. You've always been reasonable. I still am. He hesitated. What do you want? Process, I said. Board review. Risk assessment. And clarity about authority before statements are made. He nodded slowly. Not agreement. Recognition. Dependency reveals itself in questions like that. On Monday morning, I sent a summary email to the board outlining the triggered clause and attaching counsel's interpretation. I requested a formal vote scheduled 2 weeks out, allowing time for documentation and financial modeling. I updated vendor contracts to reflect current approval requirements. I redirected expansion discussions to a shared executive channel. No grand gestures, just updated records. Daniel called twice. I let it go to voicemail once, answered the second time. We're family, he said. We're also a corporation, I replied. The board met as scheduled. After reviewing projections, legal implications, and risk exposure, they voted to maintain the shared voting structure until year-end performance metrics were evaluated. Unanimous consent remained necessary. Authority did not disappear. It redistributed. I did not attend the rescheduled birthday dinner. Instead, I sent a gift, a framed photograph of the garage where the company began. On the back I wrote, "Foundations matter. No speech. No correction." I closed my laptop that evening at a reasonable hour and walked home through streets that felt unusually quiet. I didn't need the microphone. There's a difference between visibility and control. Visibility is celebrated. It's photographed, toasted, applauded. Control is documented. One announces itself. The other updates clauses. For years, I believed that being steady meant being secondary. That competence was support, not authority. But underestimation is a kind of camouflage. It allows you to learn the entire structure while others rehearse speeches. I don't resent Daniel. Confidence is easier to perform than compliance audits. I don't resent my father. He built something from nothing and fears stagnation more than instability. What changed wasn't affection. It was clarity. We now operate with defined processes. Decisions pass through review. Announcements follow votes, not precede them. It's less theatrical. It's more durable. Sometimes I think about the moment in the private room when the fork paused above the cake. That was the shift. Not the clause. Not the email. The realization in the room that authority is not a tone of voice. It's a structure. And structures, once clarified, are difficult to misinterpret again. Control doesn't need applause. It simply adjusts the terms and continues.